The evening was going perfectly until Lauretta George smiled, looped her arm through a 60-year-old man's elbow, and introduced him as her boyfriend. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before Kang Si-jun laughed. Not the polite kind, the kind that fills a room and embarrasses everyone in it. Chairman Kang Jae-won simply walked up, looked between Lauretta and the man once, and then Chairman Oh Dae-sung was on the floor. Nobody saw exactly what happened. The chairman was already straightening his cufflinks. Oh Dae-sung was already asking the ceiling why he suddenly fell, and Lauretta George was looking at Si-jun like she needed him to explain what she just witnessed. If you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notification bell because you do not want to miss what comes next. And if you are already family, you know how we do things here. Let us get all the way into it. To understand how Lauretta George ended up on the arm of a 60-year-old man at one of Seoul's most prestigious business galas, while the son of the most feared chairman in the country stood across the room coming apart at the seams in real time, we have to go back. Not a little back. All the way back to a woman named Abigail George, a man who made the single worst decision of his adult life, and a Mafia chairman who fell so completely and so embarrassingly in love that he walked past one woman's desk 3 times in a single hour with 3 different excuses. Chairman Kang Jae-won was not a man who was embarrassed easily. He had built his empire from nothing, the legitimate side and the side that existed in strategic shadows, and both sides of that world respected him in the manner reserved for things people were slightly afraid of. He was composed and deliberate and had the kind of patience that made opponents nervous because they could never calculate when it was running out. He had survived things that should have ended him and had thrived in rooms that had swallowed better men whole. He was, by every measure that mattered in Seoul's business world, untouchable. Then Abigail George walked into his office building as his new secretary and touched him directly in the part of his chest he had forgotten was operational. She was warm in the way that disarms you before you realize it. She was honest in the way that made you check yourself before you opened your mouth. She laughed at the right things, took no nonsense from the wrong things, and moved through a room with the kind of quiet confidence that made you want to watch her even when nothing was happening. And the chairman, a man who had faced down rivals without blinking, found himself unable to pass her desk without manufacturing a reason to do so. Monday, he had forgotten a document. Same Monday, 20 minutes later, he needed his pen. Same Monday, 40 minutes after that, he was just stretching his legs and happened to be walking in that direction. Abigail George looked up from her work on the 3rd pass, studied him with the patience of someone who had noticed all 3 visits and was choosing kindness over accuracy, and asked if he was perhaps feeling unwell because he seemed a little restless today. The chairman said he was perfectly fine and walked back to his office with the dignity of a man who was not fine at all. He tried flowers. Every Monday, a fresh arrangement on her desk. She thanked him professionally and asked if there was anything else she could help him with. He had her office repainted in a shade she had mentioned admiring once. She noticed, told him it was a lovely color, and returned to her work. He extended her lunch breaks. She read during them. He offered a company car. She told him public transport was genuinely quite efficient, and she would prefer to save the company the fuel cost. The man nearly wrote a letter of resignation to himself. And through all of it, sitting directly in his line of sight, watching with the composed face of a man who had absolutely no business being composed, was Gregory George. His PA, Gregory, was sharp and quick and had been at the chairman's side long enough to know exactly how he thought, what he needed before he asked for it, and how to present information in the way most likely to produce the outcome he wanted. He was, in the chairman's assessment, one of the best people he had ever employed. He was also, and this requires a moment of proper preparation before it is stated, secretly dating Abigail George, not admiring from a distance, not occasionally having coffee, dating. Taking her to dinner at restaurants positioned on the most opposite end of Seoul from anyone who might recognize either of them. Walking with her in places where cameras did not point. Holding her hand in the brief windows between everything else. Telling her they needed to be careful. Telling her it was only for now. Telling her to be patient. And then, having done all of that, Gregory George would return to the office the next morning, sit across from Chairman Kang Jae-won, and advise him on how to win the woman he had just taken to dinner the night before. "Be patient, sir. Gregory said, looking his boss in the eye with the unshakable composure of a man who had either lost his mind entirely or had simply decided that God was not watching that particular office on that particular day. "You think so?" the chairman said, leaning forward like a student desperate for answers. "A woman of her quality needs time to trust, sir. She will not be rushed. The best approach is patience and consistency." "Patience," the chairman repeated, the way a man repeats a word that has just been handed to him as a life strategy. "Precisely, sir. Give her time. Don't rush it." The man was coaching his own boss on how to win the woman he was secretly dating, for months, without blinking. Gregory George looked his boss in the face and said those words. He gave that advice. He went home that evening and called Abigail. He did this for months, without his expression changing once. If that is not the most spectacular act of self-destruction ever conducted from inside a business suit, this story has nothing further to offer on the subject. The day it ended badly, as all things built on sand eventually must. The chairman discovered that Abigail was pregnant. He discovered whose child it was. Gregory George sat across from him in that office one final time and understood, with the full accumulated weight of every decision he had ever made, arriving simultaneously, what the word consequences actually meant when it was held by a man like Chairman Kang Jae-won. What happened in that room in the minutes that followed is not something Gregory George has ever discussed in detail, which tells you everything you need to know about it. He left, quickly and completely. He packed what he could carry fast, disappeared from the building, left the city, left the country, and was gone before anyone had finished processing the fact that he was going. He left behind a job, a reputation, stolen trade secrets tucked carefully into his luggage like insurance he hoped never to use, and Abigail George, who was pregnant and suddenly and completely alone, looking for a man who had already decided that distance was his best available option. Chairman Kang went to Abigail. He sat across from her and told her that whatever she needed, he would provide. He told her he still wanted to marry her, said it with the directness of a man who had been waiting for the right moment and had decided this was it regardless of the circumstances. Abigail George looked at him with the most honest and careful eyes a person has ever used to break someone's heart gently, and told him that she was grateful for everything he had ever done for her, that he was a good man, that she hoped he knew that, and that she only loved Gregory. Even after everything, even after he ran, even after the silence, she still loved him. She spent the rest of her pregnancy searching for Gregory George and not finding him, because a man who does not want to be found is very difficult to locate, and Gregory George had specific reasons to remain unfound that he had thought through carefully before disappearing. The searching lived in her body alongside everything else. She gave birth to a little girl with her father's surname and her mother's soul and named her Lauretta. And then Abigail George, who had been too good and too loving for the circumstances she had found herself in, lost the quiet war. Her body had been fighting with grief and worry and sleepless thinking, high blood pressure, the kind of complications that come when a person never stops thinking, never stops worrying, never stops waiting for a door that will not open. She was gone before Lauretta was old enough to ask where her father was. Chairman Kang Jae-won took Lauretta in the same week. He already had a son, Kang Si-jun, had been born to Han Soo-jin, a woman the chairman had been connected to long before Abigail ever arrived. He married Soo-jin in the months after Abigail died because it was the right thing to do, and he had delayed it considerably longer than was reasonable, and they both understood the full complicated history of that wedding without needing to name it out loud. Han Soo-jin was a woman who had waited while the man she loved redirected his attention towards someone else, who had raised a child largely on her own emotional resources, and who had now received her marriage alongside a small girl she had not planned for. She accepted it. She was not always warm about it, but she was never cruel, and in the careful accounting of what people owe each other, that counted for something real. The chairman told himself he was taking Lauretta in because Abigail deserved to have her child protected. He told himself that, and it was completely true. It was also true that Lauretta George had something in her eyes at barely 2 years old that stopped him in the middle of whatever he was doing when he looked at her too long. Something steady and present and deeply familiar. He raised Lauretta and Si-jun as one, no distinction in education, in training, in expectation, or in access. Both sat through long and demanding sessions on trade strategy and financial negotiation until they could argue either side of a deal in their sleep. Both learned 2 business languages until switching between them mid-sentence became as natural as breathing. Both trained in Taekwondo until the discipline had settled into their bodies and become simply part of how they existed in a room. The chairman told Lauretta regularly that she was free to go and look for her father whenever she chose, that the door was always open. She never walked through it. She looked at Chairman Kang Jae-won and saw everything she needed a father to be. She looked at Si-jun and saw her brother. Called him that. He accepted it. Everything was perfectly straightforward, until it was not. Growing up with someone, training beside them, arguing about the last portion of food at dinner, beating them at sparring and being beaten in return, losing to them at business strategy and winning in the next round, these things build something whether you intend for them to or not. Si-jun did not intend for anything. He simply looked at Lauretta one afternoon, while she was dismantling an argument he had been quite confident in, using nothing but logic and a calm, unhurried stare, and realized that somewhere between that moment and every other moment that had accumulated quietly before it, he had made a significant and irreversible error. He had developed feelings for the girl his father had raised alongside him. He buried them with the discipline of someone who had been trained since childhood to suppress instinct and make calculated decisions. He buried them thoroughly and told himself that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. One afternoon during a business strategy session, Si-jun laid out a position he had prepared carefully and was quite confident in. Lauretta listened without interrupting. Then she asked him one question, just one, and the entire structure of his argument quietly rearranged itself into something considerably less impressive. She did not gloat. She simply waited, with the patience of someone who already had the next question ready. And Si-jun, looking at her in that specific moment, understood with the clean unpleasantness of a man receiving information he had not requested that he was in significant and irreversible trouble. He buried it immediately, put it down, covered it, smoothed everything flat on top of it, and told himself it was handled. He was disciplined. He had been trained since childhood to manage impulse and make calculated decisions. He was absolutely fine. He lay awake 2 nights thinking about the way she said his name. He caught himself watching the door when she was late returning from somewhere. He sat through a meeting where she was presenting to a room and spent a portion of it redirecting his attention to the content of what she was saying rather than the manner in which she was saying it, with approximately 40% success. He could not stay. The calculation was clear. He could not remain in the same compound, the same training room, the same boardroom, with this thing that had no business existing growing louder by the week. He needed distance, structure, and enough physical space between himself and this problem to think about it without her walking into the room and undoing the thinking. An MBA abroad was the right decision, a genuine one. He would build something of his own there too, prove to himself and to his father that he could stand without the family name carrying him. And across all that time and all that distance, he would sort out whatever this was and return as a person who had his interior life organized. That was the plan. Before he could execute it, Lauretta came to find him. She stood in front of him with the composure of someone who had made a decision and had made peace with the making of it before she knocked on the door. She told him simply and clearly that she liked him, that it had grown on her over time without her planning for it, and she was not entirely certain what it meant in practical terms, but she thought he should know it before he left. Si-jun looked at her. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at his luggage sitting packed by the door. He looked at the floor. He looked back at Lauretta George, who was standing in front of him with more courage than he was currently managing by a significant margin, waiting with the patience he absolutely did not deserve. He said nothing. He finished the last of his packing. He went to the airport. He boarded his flight. And somewhere over the ocean, in a window seat with the lights off and the cabin quiet around him, Kang Si-jun stared out at nothing and understood fully what he had just done and said nothing about it to anyone, including himself. Lauretta George stood in that room after he walked out, understood with the complete clarity of a woman who has just received silence in response to honesty exactly what that silence meant, straightened herself up, and went back to work. She worked with the particular intensity of a person who has decided that feelings with nowhere to go will become results instead. She built. She negotiated hard and thought harder. Her name appeared in headlines. She became the kind of CEO other CEOs mentioned when listing people worth genuinely watching. She was exceptional and composed, and warm with everyone around her, and she did not think about Kang Si-jun any more than was entirely unavoidable, which was more than she would have preferred, but that was private information, and she kept it private. 3 years passed, then Chairman Kang Jae-won picked up his phone, called his son, and communicated 4 things in the order of their importance to him. He was not getting any younger. He had been more than patient. He wanted grandchildren while he was still healthy enough to enjoy them, and Si-jun needed to come home and find himself a wife. Si-jun, in the middle of a board meeting on another continent, excused himself, stepped into the corridor and said, "Father, I am currently grandchildren," the chairman said. "Come home." "I have a business to grandchildren, Si-jun. The timing is not ideal, right?" "I have been patient," the chairman said, and the word patient landed in that sentence carrying the full biographical weight of a man who had spent years coaching other people to have it. "Come home." Si-jun came home. The chairman arranged a feast because when has any Korean father not arranged a feast for a returning son, which meant it was large, excellently catered, and attended by more people than the occasion strictly required. The house was warm and loud, and Lauretta was near the entrance when Si-jun walked through the door. She had grown into herself in the years he had been away in the specific way people do when they have been living at full capacity. She looked exactly like the woman whose name appeared in every relevant publication. Composed, bright, entirely and comfortably herself. She saw him and smiled the way you smile at someone you have known your whole life, open and uncomplicated and genuinely glad, and said with complete naturalness, "Welcome home, brother." Kang Si-jun stopped walking. He looked at Lauretta George. Something moved behind his eyes, rapid and complicated, that he extinguished with the discipline of someone who had been practicing exactly this for 3 years. Then he said very clearly, so there could be no possible confusion, "I am not your brother." The nearby conversations found other directions immediately. Someone became very interested in the food table. Lauretta tilted her head slightly in the way she did when something surprised her, but she had decided composure was the better response, smiled once more with the professionalism of someone trained to handle the unexpected, and moved to greet the other guests as though nothing had happened. Chairman Kang Jae-won, standing a short distance away with his hands folded behind his back and a glass of something excellent, watched all of this with a face that was completely neutral and contained something very large indeed. He nodded slowly to himself, with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose data had just confirmed a long-held hypothesis, and went to speak to someone else. That night, after the guests had gone and Si-jun was staying over, the chairman called his son into his study. He poured 2 glasses. He settled into his chair with the ease of a man who had been looking forward to this particular conversation for some time. "So," he said. "So," Si-jun said, "you are home." "I am home." "Good." The chairman nodded. He looked at his son steadily. "I did not call you home merely to look at your face, handsome as it is. I want grandchildren. I am not getting any younger, and my patience is a thing that has limits. You will find yourself a wife, and you will give me grandchildren before I am too old to chase them around. Tell me you have given this some thought." Si-jun shifted slightly. "I have been thinking about it." "And? There is a woman." The chairman's eyebrows moved upward by a measured degree, the way a man's do when he is preparing to receive information that will require careful management. "Tell me about her." "I met her abroad. She is a good woman." "Where is she now?" "She is currently," Si-jun paused. "She is pregnant." The chairman set down his glass. He picked it back up. He set it down again. He looked at his son with the expression of a physician who has just received a set of results that are going to require a longer appointment than he had allocated. "She is pregnant," he said carefully. "Yes." "And the child is yours?" Si-jun paused for just a moment too long. "No," he said. The chairman looked at his son. He looked at the glass in front of him. He looked at his son again. He picked up the glass and finished everything in it in one deliberate movement and set it back down empty. "And you want to marry her?" "Yes." "With the pregnancy?" "Yes, father." Chairman Kang Jae-won closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, he began to laugh. Not briefly, not politely. From somewhere deep in the chest, the kind that requires both hands on the desk and several attempts to bring it back under any form of control. He laughed until he coughed. He coughed until he had to hold up one hand to prevent Sejun from offering assistance. He wiped his eyes with the careful dignity of a man retrieving his composure from the far corner of the room where it had rolled. "How did you meet her?" he asked when he could. "She helped me with her umbrella," Sejun said, "when it was raining." The chairman stared at his son. "Once," Sejun clarified. The chairman looked at the ceiling. He took his time with the ceiling, then he looked back at Sejun. "What do you love about her?" Sejun opened his mouth. He thought. He closed his mouth. He opened it again. Several seconds passed in which words did not appear. "The umbrella," he said finally. "The umbrella," the chairman repeated with the tone of a man hearing a confession he was not spiritually prepared for. "She was generous with a stranger. She did not know me, and she—" "What is your type, Sejun?" the chairman asked, cutting through with the calm of a man who has decided to approach this from an entirely different direction. Sejun frowned. "My type? The kind of woman you want. Describe her for me." Sejun opened his mouth. This time, he did not even reach the point of closing it before the absence became apparent. The words were simply not there. He had never thought about it in those specific terms, and the current evidence of his preferences was not painting a picture that invited further examination. The chairman watched this performance with patience. Then he said, with the measured pace of someone building deliberately to a point, "What about Lauretta?" Sejun looked up sharply. "I am only asking," the chairman said mildly. "You are constructing a list. I want to know where she falls." "Lauretta is," Sejun started, then stopped. "Lauretta is not, that is a different conversation entirely." "Is it? We grew up together. She is like a, you told her tonight she is not your sister." "That is, I was simply clarifying, I noticed," the chairman said pleasantly. "The point is, she is not my type. She is too independent, too strong-willed, too—" He ran out of descriptions that were accurately critical rather than accidentally flattering. The chairman folded his hands and looked at his son. He let the quiet sit between them for a moment. Then he spoke with the calm delivery of a man presenting a verdict he has been preparing for some time. "You prefer the type you have currently found, the one in an existing situation, the one whose generosity during rainfall you find compelling." Meanwhile, Lauretta George has been in 3 business publications this quarter alone. She holds board positions. She speaks 4 languages, including the 2 I specifically made certain she learned. She placed in a taekwondo competition last year. She has built herself into someone whose name other CEOs mention when they are listing people who genuinely impress them. He paused. He looked at his son with warm and unhurried eyes. "And she is not your type." Sejun said nothing. "I have been praying," the chairman continued with the sincerity of a man who meant every word of it, "for years that you would come to your senses and fall in love with that woman and marry her. The things the 2 of you could build, the force you would be together. I have looked forward to it." He shook his head slowly. "And here you sit, in my study with my good whiskey, telling me she is not your type, while a woman who helped you once with an umbrella is apparently your life's great romantic ambition." He looked at Sejun over his glass. "I am weeping in my spirit right now as I look at you." Sejun stared at his father. "Go to sleep, my son," the chairman said gently. What Sejun did not know, what he had absolutely no way of knowing as he left that study and walked down the corridor, was that his father would have given his blessing without a single condition or a moment of hesitation. For years, Chairman Kang Jae-won had watched his son and Lauretta move through the same rooms, argue with the same energy, push each other with the specific friction of 2 people who were made to challenge one another, and he had prayed, quietly and consistently, and with the sincerity of a man who meant every word of it. He had prayed that his son would open his eyes and see what was standing right beside him, that he would stop being disciplined about the wrong things and simply fall in love with that woman the way she deserved to be fallen in love with, that he would marry her and give him grandchildren he could be proud of and build something together that the chairman could point at and say he had a hand in. He had wanted it for years. He had never said it directly because some things a father has to let a son arrive at on his own terms, or it means nothing when he gets there. But he had wanted it, deeply and without reservation. And here was his son, walking down that corridor, completely unaware that the one thing he had been running from was the one thing his father had been hoping he would run toward. He had spent years convincing himself that his feelings were something to be managed, kept abroad, left behind, outgrown, and he had built walls around the entire thing so carefully and for so long that he had very nearly convinced himself. Very nearly. 4 days later, there was a board meeting. Lauretta arrived early. She was already in conversation with 2 colleagues when Si-jun walked in, laughing at something, completely relaxed in the specific way she was relaxed when he was not in the room. She had a particular ease that functioned best in his absence, and he had noticed this precise pattern, and it was one of the more irritating pieces of data he was currently carrying. He scanned the table without appearing to. He noted where she was sitting. He noted who was sitting 2 seats from her, a man named Park, something who was laughing along with the conversation and was, by no reasonable metric Si-jun could construct, doing anything wrong. Si-jun walked directly over, placed a hand on the man's shoulder, and said simply, "Stand up." Park something turned around, looked at Si-jun, looked at the seat Si-jun was clearly intending to occupy, looked around the room for anyone willing to make eye contact, and found nobody who was prepared to offer it. He quietly relocated to another seat. Lauretta did not look up from her documents. She slid her tablet exactly 2 inches away from Si-jun. He retrieved it and placed it back. She slid it further. He moved it back. She looked down at her tablet, then looked sideways at him with the expression of someone conducting a patience experiment with a known variable, and slid it once more. He placed his hand flat on top of it. Chairman Kang, at the head of the table, observed all of this with the attentive interest of a man watching a nature documentary from a very comfortable position. The meeting ended. Lauretta was in the corridor at professional speed. Si-jun fell into step beside her. "What are we fighting about?" he said. "I am not fighting," she said pleasantly, maintaining a pace that was technically still a walk. "You are avoiding me. I am going to my next meeting." "Lauretta?" She stopped, turned, gave him the full composed attention of someone who had decided to address this once and cleanly. "The problem," she said, "is that I do not know what to call you when I need to come to you. You are not my brother, as you have made clear, but I do not know what that makes you. So until that is resolved, I am simply walking in the direction of things I am certain about." He reminded her again she was not his sister. "Yes," she said, "that is exactly the problem." She walked away. He stood in the corridor processing this and arriving nowhere useful. He found her later and asked if she would join him for dinner. "As what?" she asked. He said 2 CEOs. She told him with complete reasonableness that she did not do dinner with business associates because the media had a creative and committed relationship with fabrication, and she was a woman, which meant every dinner produced 3 headlines before the dessert arrived. She excused herself before he had assembled a response. Over the following week, Si-jun attempted several approaches. He sent a message. She responded within minutes, professionally in bullet points. He positioned himself near a meeting she was leaving. She had somewhere else to be. He found her in a building conversation and joined it. She navigated away with the efficiency of someone for whom evasive movement was a trained skill, which, given their shared taekwondo background, was not entirely metaphorical. Han Soo-jin watched her son position himself near Lauretta at the 3rd consecutive family dinner and said nothing aloud. But the look she delivered to the chairman across the table was the look of a woman who had been watching a situation develop for considerably longer than anyone was giving her credit for and had assembled opinions about every stage of it. Then, in a moment of frustration he would spend considerable time examining later, Si-jun said it. They were at the end of a corridor after a meeting. Lauretta had done the thing again where she was warm and laughing with 2 colleagues and then shifted into professional composure the moment he joined them, and something in Si-jun arrived at the end of its available capacity. The colleagues had barely left before he said it. "You know your shakara is too much. You are not my type anyway." Lauretta stopped walking. She turned around slowly. She looked at Kang Si-jun with the careful attention of someone who wants to be absolutely certain they have heard correctly before they respond. "I beg your pardon?" she said. "I said what I said," Sejun said, with the confidence of a man who had not fully thought through what came after saying what he said. Kang Sejun. She said his full name with the measured patience of a judge reading a verdict. No one asked you. I know, but I was simply, no one in this corridor, in this building, in this city, asked you whether I was your type. She tilted her head. But since we are here, you are not my type either. Sejun blinked. What? You heard me. What do you mean I am not your type? I mean precisely what I said. What is your type then? Lauretta smiled, the pleasant, composed, entirely unrevealing smile she kept for situations that required her to communicate everything while saying nothing. Have a good afternoon, Sejun. She walked away. Kang Sejun stood in that corridor with the specific expression of a man who entered a conversation fully confident and exited. It's somewhere he had not planned to be. The building's air conditioning continued operating without concern for his situation. Now, if you have been waiting for this story to reach peak chaos, this is the moment. A business gala, Seoul's most distinguished in one room. Good champagne and better conversation and people watching each other with the particular attention of those who conduct business the way others conduct war. Lauretta George arrived looking precisely like the woman the headlines described, which is to say she arrived looking like someone who knew exactly who she was and required no one's confirmation of it. Sejun arrived and scanned the room with the efficiency of a man who tells himself he is not looking for anyone in particular and locates that person in under 4 seconds. She was standing with an older man, silver at the temples, the distinguished kind that comes with decades of operating with an unbothered conscience. Their conversation was easy. She was laughing. Sejun began moving before the decision had fully formed. Lauretta noticed him approaching. Something small and deliberate moved across her face for less than a full second and was gone. Sejun arrived. He nodded at Lauretta. He looked at the man beside her. Lauretta George smiled with the warmth of someone who has been planning this moment with considerable care. Oh, perfect timing, she said. Sejun, I would like you to meet my boyfriend. She looked up at Chairman Oh Dae-sung with an expression of affection so convincingly produced, it deserved its own separate recognition. We have been seeing each other for a little while now. Chairman Oh Dae-sung, who had attended a great many business events and had never once been introduced as anyone's boyfriend without prior consultation, looked between Lauretta and Sejun with the alert attention of a man who has just stepped into something and is trying to assess the depth before committing further. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Kang Sejun laughed, not briefly, not for politeness. It came from somewhere genuine and filled that corner of the room completely, and then expanded. He laughed at Lauretta. He laughed at Oh Dae-sung, who looked like a man reconsidering the entire evening. He laughed with the specific delight of a person who has just received information that is simultaneously completely ridiculous and extremely revealing. And then Chairman Kang Jae-won materialized beside them. He looked at Lauretta. He looked at Oh Dae-sung. Something moved behind his eyes with the speed and precision of a calculation running to completion. Then Oh Dae-sung was on the floor. Nobody saw it happen. It was too fast and too precise. One moment the chairman was standing, the next he was straightening his cufflinks. Oh Dae-sung was addressing the ceiling with the bewildered expression of a man trying to understand why he was suddenly horizontal. The people nearby were performing the particular Korean social art of witnessing without appearing to witness, which involves a very specific angle of the head and a sudden profound interest in one's champagne glass. Sejun looked at his father. The chairman surveyed the room with the serenity of a man who had done something entirely reasonable and was at peace with it. Oh Dae-sung accepted 2 sets of hands helping him back to his feet, adjusted his jacket, and turned to the chairman with the measured fury of a man who was also intelligent enough to know precisely who he was measuring it against. Later, when Sejun had moved to another part of the event and the crowd had redistributed itself, Chairman Kang Jae-won walked over to where Oh Dae-sung was making careful final adjustments to his jacket and his dignity. Oh Dae-sung looked at him. Jae-won. Dae-sung, the chairman said pleasantly. You hit me. Did I? I was on the floor. These events can become quite crowded. It is easy to lose one's footing. Oh Dae-sung looked at his old friend for a long moment. You will apologize to me, he said. And you, the chairman replied with equal pleasantness. Will stay away from my son's future wife, so here we both are, wanting things. Oh Dae-sung straightened. He looked across the room at Lauretta and then back at the chairman. Future wife, he said. Future wife, the chairman confirmed. Interesting. Oh Dae-sung smoothed his lapel thoughtfully. Because I have been thinking, Jae-won, and I want you to hear me fully before you do anything further with your hands, that she would make an exceptional wife for my son. I have been thinking about it since her first headline. That woman is extraordinary. You cannot keep something like that within one family's ambitions. The chairman looked at his friend with the patience of a man deciding how many times he was prepared to say the same thing. She is my son's. Your son, Oh Dae-sung observed carefully, does not appear to know that yet. He will arrive there. My son is faster. Your son, the chairman said, is not a variable in this conversation. Your son told her she was not his type in a public corridor. Oh Dae-sung said, and the look he wore contained a specific intelligence. I have sources, Jae-won. The man told Lauretta George in front of witnesses that she is not his type. My son has never said anything that foolish to a woman in his life. The chairman closed his eyes briefly. He opened them. I will apologize to you, he said, on the day my son marries that woman. And if your son does not move with appropriate speed, then I will never apologize, the chairman said, because I will be occupied with other matters involving you that will leave no time for apologies. Oh Dae-sung considered this. He looked at the chairman. He looked toward where Lauretta was standing across the room. He reconsidered several things at once. Then he decided that the table with the champagne needed his attention and went toward it. If you have been watching this story and your heart has not yet returned to its normal rhythm, good. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us whose side you are on, and share this with someone who needs it today. We are nowhere near finished. The threat arrived in the form of Choi Byung-hak. He was the kind of businessman who had understood early in life that everything could be purchased and that the skill was identifying what the other person valued before they named their price. He had been watching the edges of the Kang Empire for some time and had concluded he had found something worth pressing. The message he sent was worded with the kind of politeness that sits on top of something entirely different underneath. The meaning was clear enough. The three of them gathered to assess it. Chairman Kang at the head, Si-jun to his right, Lauretta directly across from Si-jun because she had understood from early on that where you sat communicated how you saw yourself, and she saw herself as someone who sat across from the most important person in the room. She listened to the full picture of what Choi was doing, turned it over once in her mind, and said that the most efficient approach was penetration. To send someone into their territory as a trusted contact, to gather what was needed from inside before any external move was made. She was proposing herself. The chairman looked at the table and said nothing. Si-jun began shaking his head, not speaking, just shaking his head, slowly, with the steady, committed repetition of someone who had decided this was his contribution to the meeting and was going to maintain it. Lauretta watched him for several seconds. Then she said, with the patience of a woman who has tolerated sufficient head movement for one afternoon, "Since you are shaking your head like an Agama lizard to my idea, the floor is yours. Tell us your plan. We are listening." The chairman looked at the wall. Si-jun stopped shaking his head. "I beg your pardon?" he said. "Your idea," Lauretta said pleasantly. "You clearly have one. Please share it with the room." Si-jun did not have a fully formed plan. He had concerns which were genuine, and he had a strong feeling in the back of his neck about sending Lauretta into Choi's territory that had nothing to do with professional risk assessment and everything to do with something he was not currently naming out loud. He said her approach was too exposed. He said it required more consideration. He said several individually true things that did not collectively constitute a plan. The chairman ended the meeting. In the corridor, Si-jun caught up with Lauretta, and the argument continued with the specific energy of people who are arguing about one thing, while actually negotiating something else entirely. "Everything I said in that room was for your protection," he said, "for your benefit. You should recognize that." "Should I?" Lauretta said, walking. "Yes, you should. In fact, you should be thinking about how to properly show appreciation for someone who is consistently looking out for you." Lauretta stopped. She turned. She looked at him. She brought both hands together and began clapping. Once, twice, 3 times, slow, deliberate. With the solemn expression of a person at a ceremony who has complicated feelings about the recipient. A standing ovation, she said. That is what you have earned today. Sejun stared at her hands. He stared at her face. He looked at the ceiling, which had been providing him no useful information throughout this entire period, but which he kept consulting out of habit. He said nothing. That evening, as they moved toward their cars in the underground car park, Sejun called after her and she slowed without fully stopping. "We do not have to keep doing this," he said, drawing alongside her. "My father is not getting any younger. He has made his wishes about grandchildren very clear. The two of us—" Lauretta stopped walking. She turned. She looked at Sejun with an expression he could not read at the surface, but which had something underneath it. "The two of us," she said. "I am simply saying that if we consider—" "Sejun." She tilted her head. "You marry your wife, I will marry my husband. We will each give your father his grandchildren from our separate homes like 2 responsible adults." She paused just long enough. "This is not something we plan together." Sejun stared at her. "That is not what I meant." "I am not saying it is a plan." "Then what are you saying?" He looked at her. He tried a different approach. "What if I am saying that it could be the two of us?" Lauretta was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at him with the careful precision of someone who has decided to say something that needs to land properly. "You told me I was not your type," she said. "Those were your words in a public corridor to my face. So I want you to look at me right now and tell me honestly, what league exactly are you placing yourself in when you come to me in a car park and suggest we figure out your father's grandchildren together? Because I want to know if you genuinely believe you are in the league of men I would consider." Kang Sejun stared at her. She waited with the patience of someone who has asked a real question and wants a real answer. He had nothing. He stood in a car park with his MBA, his business empire, his taekwondo training, and every quality he possessed, and produced absolutely nothing. She nodded once, as though this confirmed something she had already suspected, and walked toward her car. Sejun stood alone in the car park for some time. He went home and made a decision he was sincerely persuaded was the correct romantic move. He selected a package with care, had it wrapped properly, wrote a handwritten note expressing regret about the argument and goodwill toward a better way forward. He sent it to her apartment that evening. It was lingerie. His phone rang 40 minutes later. He answered. "Father," he said. "My son," the chairman said warmly. "How are you this evening?" "I am well, Sejun stopped. "How are you calling me?" "You answered. That is generally how it works." "I mean—" Sejun stopped again. "Good evening, father." "Good evening, you seem distracted. Did something happen after you left this evening?" Sejun went very still. "Why do you ask?" "Because I am your father and I like to know you are well. Did you do something? Send something, perhaps?" The silence that followed was the silence of a man who has said absolutely nothing and has nevertheless confessed to everything. "How do you know what I sent?" Sejun said. "Sent what?" the chairman said. You asked if I sent something." "I asked if something happened. Sent was your word." Sejun held the phone away from his ear. He looked at it. He held it back. "Father." "My son." "How do you know?" The chairman exhaled slowly. "You are not romantic," he said. "I want you to hear me clearly. You are not romantic at all, not even a little, not even by accident." He paused. "There are flowers in this world, Sejun. There are handwritten letters. There is chocolate, fruit, a simple and sincere conversation between two people. These things exist. They are affordable. They are available in this city at this very hour. And out of everything in the world you could have chosen, you sent that woman that." Sejun opened his mouth. "Do not speak yet," the chairman said. "I am not finished. I am an old man. At the rate you are going, you will not give me grandchildren at all. That woman will find someone with basic sense before you finish confusing her. But let us say by some miracle you eventually succeed with this strategy of yours. By that time, my hands will be shaking so badly, I will not be able to hold the child without assistance. My eyes will be so far gone, I will have to ask someone to describe the child to me. They will bring the baby to me, and I will be squinting into the distance like I am trying to read a signboard from across the street, asking if it is a boy or a girl, because I genuinely cannot tell from here." He paused. "That is the future you are building for your father, a squinting, shaking old man who has grandchildren he cannot see or hold properly. Is that what you want?" The package was a peace offering. "Send fruit next time," the chairman said firmly. "Good night, my son." "You never told me how you—" "Good night," the chairman said with great warmth and ended the call. Sejun sat in his apartment. He stared at the wall. He stared at his phone. He stared at the wall again. Lauretta George, across the city, received the package. She stood holding it for a long moment. She read the note twice. She shook her head slowly and with considerable feeling. Then she carried the package carefully to the back of her wardrobe, the specific location reserved for things a person is not yet ready to address, and went to make herself tea. The tea was good. She sat with it for a while. She thought about several things. She did not think about the package at the back of her wardrobe. Or so she told herself. Choi Byung-hak's full terms arrived a week later in formal language that was polite on the surface and an ultimatum underneath. He wanted an alliance. He wanted it sealed with a marriage. Lauretta George, presented as a settlement, as though she were an asset to be transferred. Lauretta said she would attend the dinner with him. She said it with a finality that left no room to be undone. Sejun found her in the car park. Again, the car park had become, at this point, their unofficial venue for every conversation that actually mattered, which said something about both of them and the kind of honesty that only seems to arrive in parking lots. "You are not going to that dinner," he said. "I have already agreed to go." "Lauretta, you are not a solution to be packaged and handed to that man." "I am aware of what I am," she said calmly. "I also know what I am doing." "And what about—" He stopped. He looked at her in the low light of the car park, at the woman who had called him brother and been shut down, who had stood in front of him before an airport and been answered with silence, who had told him he was not her type with the composure of someone who had made peace with that fact, and he made a decision. The clearest and most uncovered decision he had made in her presence in years. "What about me?" he said. She waited. "I love you." The words came out without the management he usually applied to things. "I have loved you since before I left. I loved you when you stood in front of me at that door and told me you liked me, and I stood there like a man who had forgotten how language worked and said nothing and went to the airport anyway. I loved you through every headline and every board meeting and every corridor argument and every time you slid that tablet away from me in the meeting room. I love you, and I know that you love me, and I know I have made this more complicated than it ever needed to be." He stopped. "And I am not going to stand here and watch you walk into that man's dinner and be used as a settlement. You do not deserve to be married off because someone issued a threat. If you ever marry Lauretta, let it be because you chose the person, because you love him." He looked at her directly. "A man with a threat does not get to make that decision for you. I am asking you, right now in this car park, to hear me out before you walk into that dinner." Lauretta George stood in the car park. She looked at Kang Sejun for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and even. "You love me," she said. Not a question, just the words, placed carefully between them like something she was examining before deciding what to do with it. "You had a door, Sejun. You had 3 years. You had an airport where you could have turned around at any point before that plane left the ground." She held his gaze without flinching. "You chose all of them over me, so before I give you anything back, tell me why tonight is different." Sejun did not look away. He did not reach for something polished or constructed. He simply said, "Because I am done being a coward about you. I have been disciplined about the wrong things for too long, and I am tired of it. I am tired of managing something that does not want to be managed. I am tired of watching you laugh with everyone around you and knowing that I am the reason you stop." He exhaled. "I do not have a better reason than that. I just know that I cannot watch you walk into that dinner and say nothing, not tonight." The car park was quiet around them. Lauretta looked at him for a moment longer. Then she unfolded her arms. It was a small thing, the smallest possible thing, but he had known her long enough to understand exactly what it meant. She had been holding herself together in front of him since he came home, and she had just stopped. "Are you certain?" she said. "Yes. Because you told me I was not your type." "I was wrong," he said. "Catastrophically and completely wrong. You are my type. You are the whole definition of my type. I do not have a type that is not you." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile yet, but was on its way there. Then she said, "Your father was rooting for us before you were." Sejun blinked. "He told you that?" "Last week, he sat me down and told me that you had been in love with me for years and were simply working up the courage to say it, and that I should be patient because you were not always the fastest about these things." Sejun turned slowly and looked in the direction of the building and his father, who was somewhere inside it. He had a number of specific feelings about his father at that moment that he was going to need a separate and dedicated conversation to fully address. Lauretta was laughing, the real kind, the one that started somewhere genuine and came out without management, that required a hand on the nearest surface for balance. And then, more quietly, she simply looked at him and said, "You have a lot to make up for." "I know," he said, "starting with that package you sent me." He winced. "I kept it," she said quietly. She looked at him with the composed expression of someone holding something just out of reach. "I have been wearing it, actually." She tilted her head. "Would you like to see it?" Kang Sejun experienced a brief and complete internal shutdown. "We have Choi Byung-hak to deal with," he managed, with the effort of a man attempting to recall which items were currently on his priority list. Lauretta tilted her head. "Choi Byung-hak," she said pleasantly, "can wait 30 minutes. She was right. She was usually right. Choi Byung-hak waited considerably longer than 30 minutes that night. Sejun had spent years managing his feelings for this woman with the discipline of someone trained to control everything, every instinct, every impulse, everything that threatened to surface at the wrong moment. That night, he managed nothing. By the time morning arrived through the curtains, quiet and unhurried, the distance that had lived between them since a door and an airport and 3 years of carefully maintained silence was simply gone. It had not survived the night. Neither of them mentioned Choi Byung-hak until the following afternoon. When they did, it was over coffee in Sejun's office, sitting across from each other in the specific way they had always sat across from each other in that room, except that something in the air between them was entirely different now, and they were both aware of it, and neither of them was going to be the first to make it awkward by mentioning it. Lauretta had her tablet. Sejun had his coffee. They looked at the Choi problem with the fresh eyes of two people who had just resolved something significant between them and found that the thing they had been worried about for weeks looked considerably more manageable from the other side of it. Choi Byung-hak had one pressure point. They had known this from the beginning but had been approaching it from the outside. There was a man named Seo Chang-min who had done business with Choi 10 years ago and had come away from that business missing something he had never recovered. Not money, something considerably harder to replace. Choi had used information against him in a way that had ended a partnership Seo had spent a decade building, and Seo had been carrying that with the particular patience of a man who was waiting for the right moment rather than the right emotion. Lauretta had found this out at dinner, not from Choi himself, from the way Choi's associates talked around certain subjects, the careful navigation of specific names, the slightly too casual dismissal of Seo Chang-min when his name came up once by accident. She had filed it away with the efficiency of someone who had been trained to notice what people worked hardest not to say. She sat across from him with the composed attention of someone gathering exactly what she needed, while appearing to discuss other things, because she had been trained by a Mafia chairman and had been sharpening herself in boardrooms for years, and Choi Byung-hak was not the first man to underestimate her in a room. She came back with everything she needed. She and Sejun went to Seo Chang-min together. They sat across from a man who had been waiting 10 years and presented him with something simple. They had what he needed to finish what Choi had started. In exchange, they needed him to step into a specific conversation at a specific moment and say a specific thing. That was all. One conversation. 10 years of patience for one conversation. Seo Chang-min looked at them both. Then he smiled for the first time in what appeared to be quite a while. 3 days later, Choi Byung-hak sat across from a table that had rearranged itself into something he had not anticipated and understood with the cold clarity of a man who had just discovered the floor beneath him was never as solid as he believed. Seo Chang-min was in the room. The information Seo was holding was in the room, and Lauretta George, whom he had intended to use as a settlement, was sitting across from him with the composed expression of someone who had known exactly how this meeting was going to end before she walked through the door. Choi Byung-hak looked at the position he was standing in and understood he had pressed in the wrong direction. He stepped back, not graciously, not with any particular dignity, but completely and without conditions, and that was the only thing that mattered. Sejun and Lauretta walked out of that building side by side and into the afternoon and said nothing for a moment in the way people say nothing when something they built together has just worked exactly as it was supposed to. Then Sejun looked at her and said, "The Agama lizard idea worked." Lauretta stopped walking. She turned and looked at him. "I am saying your idea worked," he said. "I know what you said. I am acknowledging it." Kang Sejun. She looked at him steadily. "Are you giving me credit?" "I am simply noting that the approach you suggested in the meeting that I responded to with appropriate caution ultimately." "Say it properly." He looked at the sky briefly. He looked back at her. "Your idea worked," he said. "It was a good idea." Lauretta George smiled, not the composed professional one, the real one, the one that required steadying yourself against something. She started walking again. "I want that in writing," she said. He fell into step beside her. "You and my father would get along very well," he said. "Why?" she said. "He also wants everything in writing." Lauretta considered this for a moment. "He is a wise man," she said. "He is an exhausting man," Sejun said. "Those are sometimes the same thing," she said, and kept walking. The chairman found out they were together on a Tuesday morning, not from Sejun, not from Lauretta, from Han Soo-jin, who had found out from the particular network of information that moves through a household when people who live in it are paying close attention, which Han Soo-jin always was. She walked into the chairman's study, closed the door behind her, and said, "Your son and Lauretta." The chairman looked up from his desk. "Together," Han Soo-jin said. "As in?" The chairman looked at her. "I know," he said. The chairman put down his pen. He sat back in his chair, and then he did something Han Soo-jin had not seen him do in a considerable number of years. He raised both hands above his head with the quiet, triumphant energy of a man who had just watched a long and carefully tended prayer arrive at its answer. He did not shout. He did not make a speech. He simply sat in his chair with his hands raised and his eyes closed for approximately 4 seconds, and then brought them back down and picked up his pen. "Finally," he said. Han Soo-jin looked at her husband. "You knew." "I have known since he came home and told her she was not his sister." "And you said nothing?" "Some things a father has to let a son arrive at on his own terms," he said, "or it means nothing when he gets there." He looked up at her. "Did I not tell you years ago that those two were inevitable? You told me you were praying for it. Which is the same thing when you pray with sufficient conviction." He picked up his phone. "I need to call Oh Dae-sung." Han Soo-jin watched him dial with the expression of a woman who had many feelings about many things and was currently organizing them into their proper order before addressing any of them. She left the study quietly. In the corridor, she stopped. She stood for a moment. She thought about Abigail George, whom she had never met, whose presence in her marriage she had felt for years in the way you feel something that existed before you arrived in a room. She thought about Lauretta, who had grown up in her house and eaten at her table, and trained beside her son, and had never once been anything less than herself, in a way that made it impossible not to respect, even when respecting her was complicated. She thought about her son, who had his father's stubbornness and had spent years being disciplined about the wrong things and had finally apparently stopped. She exhaled once, slowly, then she went back inside. Meanwhile, across the city, Chairman Oh Dae-sung received the news from his assistant, who had seen something in a photograph posted from a restaurant, and brought it to him with the specific expression of someone delivering information they were not certain how to present. Oh Dae-sung looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. Sejun and Lauretta at a restaurant. Not a business dinner, not a board meeting, a restaurant. Sitting across from each other with the body language of two people who had stopped performing neutrality. He called his son. "I need you to come home," he said. "Father, I am in the middle of, I have been defeated." Oh Dae-sung said. "Your father has been defeated. Come home." He then called Chairman Kang. The chairman answered on the second ring. "Dae-sung." "You knew," Oh Dae-sung said. "I did." "You knew and you still let me argue for my son." "I found it instructive," the chairman said pleasantly. "You owe me an apology." "I believe we have had this conversation before and arrived at the same conclusion. I will apologize to you when my son marries that woman." Oh Dae-sung was quiet. "They are already together, Jae-won." "I know. The wedding is a matter of time." "I know. So essentially you are going to apologize to me." "Essentially," the chairman agreed. "Yes, but not today. Today I am simply enjoying the morning." He paused. "How is your son?" Oh Dae-sung looked at his phone. "I am ending this call," he said. "Give him my regards," the chairman said warmly, and the call ended. Being together, it turned out, was not a simple rearrangement of what they had already been. The feelings were simple. The people were not. They were the same two people who had argued about agama lizards and grandchildren and types in corridors. They were the same two people who had been trained by the same man with the same methods and the same high expectations, and had both absorbed those expectations so thoroughly that applying them to each other in close proximity produced a very specific kind of friction. They argued on a Thursday about a business decision Sejun made without consulting her that affected a joint interest. Lauretta arrived at his office, closed the door, and explained with complete composure and unnecessary precision exactly where the decision had failed. Sejun listened. He counter-argued. She dismantled the counter-argument without raising her voice. He pointed out that she had made a similar decision the previous month without consultation. She pointed out that her decision had worked. He said that was not the point. She said it was exactly the point. They argued for 40 minutes. At the 39th minute, Sejun said something that was technically accurate and completely unhelpful. Lauretta looked at him with the expression of a woman recalibrating her position and said, in the tone she reserved for conclusions, "You are going to apologize for that." "I know," he said. "Now." "I know," he said again and apologized, which cost him something, and she understood that it cost him something, and that understanding was itself a form of intimacy they had not had access to before. They had been together for 4 months when Sejun proposed. It was not in a restaurant. It was not at a carefully orchestrated event with flowers arranged in advance and an audience positioned to witness it. It was a Sunday morning. Lauretta was at his apartment going through quarterly reports at his kitchen table with coffee she had made herself because she did not trust his coffee making, which was accurate. He was standing at the window looking at the city and not at the quarterly reports, and she had noticed he was not looking at the quarterly reports, but had said nothing because she had learned the particular quality of his silences, and this one was working toward something. He turned from the window. He looked at her across the kitchen. He said, "Marry me." Not a question, not a speech, just those 2 words with the full weight of everything they had been through behind them. Lauretta looked up from her quarterly reports. She looked at him standing across the kitchen on a Sunday morning with no performance and no arrangement, and nothing except exactly what he meant. She said, "You are not even on one knee." He looked at the floor. He looked at his knee. He looked at her. "Do you want me to?" "No," she said. She closed her tablet. "Come here." He crossed the kitchen. She looked up at him from her chair and he looked down at her, and something in the air between them was the specific warmth of 2 people who have arrived somewhere. They were always going to arrive, and both of them knew it. "Yes," she said. He exhaled, like a man who has been holding something for a long time and has just been given permission to set it down. "Although," she added, "we are going to have a conversation about the quarterly reports you have not looked at once this morning." "Tomorrow," he said. "Today," she said. "Lauretta?" "The numbers do not care that we just got engaged," she said, but she was smiling, the real one. And he sat down beside her at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, and they went through the quarterly reports together, and it was the most ordinary thing in the world, and it was everything. Gregory George came back on a Wednesday. He did not send a letter. He did not use an intermediary. He arrived at the office of Chairman Kang Jae-won and asked to be seen, alone, and something in the manner of the asking made the person at the front desk pass the request upward without editing it. The chairman received the information. He sat with it quietly for some time. Then he said to bring him up. Gregory George walked into that office 30 years older than the last time he had been in it and carried all of those years somewhere visible on him. He did not begin with justifications. He stood and said that he understood he owed debts he could not fully repay, that he had always understood that, and that the reason he was present had nothing to do with asking for what he did not deserve. He had a daughter he had never known. He was done telling himself that absence was the same thing as protection. Si-jun was in the building when the news reached him. He came to the chairman's office. He stood in the room and looked at Gregory George and said, in the measured voice he reserved for moments when he was managing most carefully what came out, that Gregory had not only abandoned a pregnant woman. When he left, he took something with him. Trade information that had appeared in their opponents' strategies over the years, in ways that had cost them, in ways that were difficult to fully calculate and impossible to ignore. Gregory did not deny it. He said he had known from the night he ran that a man like Chairman Kang Jae-won did not release debts. He said what he took was taken as insurance, the only thing he believed would make him too costly to pursue and give him time. He said he had spent every year since building himself into someone with the standing to return, not for himself, for the daughter who had her mother's name and his surname and had grown up knowing only what other people chose to tell her about where she came from. Everything I did after that night, Gregory said, was for her. Si-jun looked at this man who had abandoned the woman Lauretta would have called mother, who had taken from the family that had raised her, and he thought about Lauretta going through quarterly reports on a Sunday morning and calling his coffee making into question and saying yes across a kitchen table. He thought about what it would cost her to have a father-shaped absence in a moment like a wedding. He thought about what it would mean to her to have that absence filled. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "She decides. Whatever she decides about you, that is what stands. Not my opinion, not the chairman's history with you, her decision." The room held that sentence for a long time. Gregory George looked at Si-jun and nodded once with the understanding of a man who knows he is being given something he has not earned and is not going to waste it by arguing with the terms. Lauretta met her father on a Friday afternoon in the chairman's study. Si-jun sat beside her, saying nothing, because he understood that this was the one room where his most useful contribution was simply to stay. She sat across from a man who was a stranger with her surname, and she looked at him with the full, honest weight of what that moment actually was. She did not make it easier than it was. She did not perform forgiveness she had not yet reached. She simply stayed in the room and looked at him and said one thing. "Tell me about my mother." Gregory George looked at his daughter, and something moved across his face that had the specific quality of a wound reopening. He said, "She was the most honest person I have ever known in my life." He stopped. He steadied himself. "She deserved better than what I gave her. You both did." Lauretta was quiet. Then she said, "I know what she was. I have spent my whole life being told by a man who loved her who she was." She looked at him steadily. "I want to know what you saw, what you knew that nobody else knew. I want the version only you have." Gregory George sat across from his daughter in the chairman's study and talked about Abigail George for 2 hours, about the way she organized her thoughts before she spoke, about the specific laugh she had when something caught her completely off guard, about the way she made decisions, unhurried and final, the same way Lauretta made decisions, about the things she had said to him in the quiet moments before everything fell apart that he had carried word for 30 years because they were the truest things anyone had ever said to him, and he had not deserved a single one of them. Lauretta listened to all of it without looking away. When he was finished, she sat with it for a moment. Then she said, "I am not ready to call you anything yet. I want you to understand that." "I understand," he said, "but I am willing to find out who you are. That is what I can offer you right now." Gregory George nodded. His jaw was doing the thing jaws do when a person is managing something that wants very badly to come out. He nodded again. "That is more than I came here expecting," he said. "I know," Lauretta said. She stood up. She looked at him once more. "She would have wanted this," she said quietly. "Not for you, for me." She walked to the door, then she stopped. "Come to dinner on Sunday," she said without turning around. "Sejun makes terrible coffee, but the food is usually acceptable." She left. Gregory George sat in the chairman's study alone for a moment. Then he put his face in his hands. Not with grief exactly, with the complicated release of a man who has been carrying something for 30 years and has just been given, not absolution, but a door. A small and carefully offered door. The chairman walked in 15 minutes later, found him still sitting there, poured 2 glasses without asking, and sat across from him. They looked at each other across 30 years of everything that had passed between them. "She has her mother's way of leaving a room," Gregory said. "She has her mother's everything," the chairman said. He handed him the glass. "Drink." They sat together in that study for another hour and said the things 2 men say when enough time has passed, that the anger has become something else, and the something else is complicated but survivable. It was not an easy conversation. It was an honest one, which, in the accounting of things, was more valuable. When Gregory found out his daughter was engaged to the chairman's son, he sat very still for a moment. Then he said quietly to nobody in particular, "Of course she is." The chairman, who was present for this, said nothing. He simply looked at Gregory with the expression of a man who has spent 30 years building something from the ruins of someone else's mistake and has arrived somewhere he is at peace with. Sejun came to Gregory separately. He sat across from him without the chairman present and said simply that he loved Lauretta George and intended to spend the rest of his life making certain she never had cause to regret saying yes across a kitchen table on a Sunday morning. He said that what Gregory had taken from them was a matter that had been addressed and was behind them. He said that Lauretta had chosen to open a door and he was not going to stand in the way of what was behind it. Then he said, "But if you ever give her a reason to regret opening that door, the conversation we have after that will be a different kind of conversation." Gregory George looked at the man his daughter was going to marry and said, "I would expect nothing less." Sejun nodded. He stood up. He extended his hand. Gregory looked at it and then took it, and they shook hands across 30 years of everything that lived between their families, and somewhere in that handshake, something was laid down that allowed what came next to be possible. Han Soo-jin watched all of it with the particular expression of a woman who has seen a great many things in her life and has opinions about the full range of them. She had watched her husband raise another woman's daughter with a tenderness that told its own story, had watched that daughter grow into someone impossible not to respect, and had watched her own son stumble in circles around that same woman for years with the particular exasperation of a person watching someone take the long route to a destination that was always right in front of them. On the day Lauretta and Sejun announced their engagement over dinner, Han Soo-jin looked at her husband. Then she looked at Lauretta. Then she set down her glass and said, "You had better be ready for the kind of mother-in-law I intend to be." Lauretta looked at her without blinking and said, "I have been training for most of my life." Han Soo-jin stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then she laughed, not a small sound, the kind that surprised even the person producing it. The chairman looked between the two of them with the expression of a man who has just witnessed something that is going to change the dynamic of his household in ways he cannot yet fully predict, refilled both their glasses, and wisely said nothing. The wedding was on a Saturday in late spring. Chairman Kang Jae-won sat in the front row beside Chairman Oh Dae-sung, which was either a gesture of deep friendship or a deliberate choice of seating that would allow him to say what he had been waiting to say directly into the man's ear without raising his voice. He waited until the music started, then he leaned over. "Your son," he said quietly, with the composure of a man delivering a verdict he had prepared some time ago, "has lost." Oh Dae-sung stared straight ahead. "I want you to sit with that," the chairman continued pleasantly. "Take your time with it, and when you are ready, I want a formal apology. From you, from your son, from your household, in that order." "I am attending a wedding," Oh Dae-sung said through his teeth. "You are attending my son's wedding," the chairman said, "to the woman your son was never going to have. I also want it in writing." He smoothed his jacket. "Nothing elaborate. A simple letter will do." Oh Dae-sung turned to look at him. Jae-won, we have been friends for 40 years. 41, the chairman said, which is why I am giving you the opportunity to apologize personally rather than formally. I am being generous. Oh Dae-sung opened his mouth. Shh, the chairman said. The bride is coming. He looked up at Lauretta walking down the aisle and wept. Completely and without apology. The tears came freely, and he made no attempt to stop them. Oh Dae-sung glanced sideways at him, then back at Lauretta, and after a moment produced his own handkerchief. The chairman noticed. He said nothing, but he smiled. Han Soo-jin sat beside him and held his hand and did not say a word, which was perhaps the kindest thing she had ever done for him. Gregory George sat toward the back of the room because that was where he fit for now, and he watched his daughter walk and thought about Abigail, who had loved that child through everything and had given her a name that carried both of them. He thought about all the years, and some of what he thought about was a wound that would not fully close, and some of it he was, slowly and honestly, learning to carry differently than he had carried it before. Sejun stood at the front with the expression of a man who has finally understood something that should perhaps have been obvious considerably earlier, which is that the most extraordinary thing he had ever been given had been standing beside him for most of his life and had simply been waiting for him to stop arguing with himself about it. When Lauretta appeared, he looked at her the way you look at something that has always been yours when you finally stop being afraid to say so. Afterward, the chairman found his son and pulled him aside with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose plan, the one he had always denied having, had landed exactly where he had always intended. He told Sejun he had known from the beginning. Sejun asked, "Since when precisely?" The chairman looked at him with warm and unhurried eyes. "Since the night you came home and told her you were not her brother." He patted his son once on the shoulder. What kind of man is irritated when his sister calls him brother? Only a man who has not been thinking of her as a sister for quite some time. He smiled. "You are many things, my son. Subtle has never been among them." Sejun considered a response. He looked across the room and found Lauretta without having to search, the way he always did now, and she was laughing at something with the full, unmanaged joy of it. The real laugh, the one that had been his favorite sound before he admitted he had a favorite sound. He decided arguing was not his priority today. He went to stand beside his wife. Oh Dae-sung found the chairman at the reception and stood beside him, and they watched the room together the way old friends watch rooms at weddings, with the particular quality of men who have lived long enough to understand what they are looking at. "Fine," Oh Dae-sung said eventually. "Fine what?" the chairman said. "Fine, I will write the letter." The chairman said nothing. He lifted his glass slightly. Oh Dae-sung lifted his. They touched glasses without looking at each other and drank. "One condition," Oh Dae-sung said. "You are not in a position to have conditions." "My son attends the next company dinner." The chairman looked at him. "He is a good boy," Oh Dae-sung said, "considerably more romantic than yours ever was." "My son proposed on a Sunday morning in the kitchen and she said yes," the chairman said. "Your son has not proposed to anyone." Oh Dae-sung had nothing for that. He drank his champagne. "The letter will arrive by Friday," he said. "I will have someone watch for it," the chairman said. Han Soo-jin appeared beside her husband, looked between the two of them, decided she did not need to know what they were discussing, and took the chairman's arm. He covered her hand with his, and they stood together watching the room, and it was the quietest and most complete moment they had shared in a long time. The chairman watched them from where he stood. He thought about Abigail George, who had refused him with the most honest eyes he had ever encountered, and had done it with such grace that he had never once been able to be angry about it. He thought that perhaps some things had always been arranged to end this way, not as he had once imagined wanting. Better than that. Her daughter, laughing in a room full of people who had taken the long road to loving each other the way they deserved to be loved. It had taken them all long enough, but then, as a certain PA had once told a certain Mafia chairman about a woman they were both devoted to, in very different ways and with very different intentions, some things simply required patience. The irony, it must be said, was not lost on anyone. If this story found something in you today, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that love is inconveniently stubborn. Timing is frequently terrible. Fathers who pretend to be neutral are never neutral, and the long road sometimes leads somewhere worth every step of it. Subscribe if you have not already, and come back for the next one. We will be right here.